I want to take a second before we dive in to take a look at how the ramp works with our UVs. So I have here a ramp node. I'll go ahead and just set it back to its default. So I'll go ahead and set that to here. And it should look something like this if you loaded it on a plane. Okay, so what a ramp gradient does is it just adds a color gradient to match a single UV tile. So our UV tile here. And I have this grid, which perfectly matches that first UV tile. So we have this gradient from dark up to light. Okay, and then what we could do is we could add different points to this ramp to control the colors and the fall off of the different components of it, right? There's the color. You can change the fall off, right? So we can do a smooth fall off, exponential, etc., etc. Okay, I'll delete those again. We have multiple orientations. By default, it has a V ramp. Orientation, the UV space is V is up, U is sideways. So V ramp means an up and down gradient. U ramp is left and right. Diagonal is going to be diagonal. Radial is going to rotate like a clock. And then the one we want is the circular ramp. And you'll see the circular ramp is a lot like our radial UV layout for our iris. It circles around the center of the scene, and it is symmetrical radially from around the center point of the UV tile. So around from here. And actually, let's go ahead and bring that up just so we can see that. So we'll go here, iris, Shift H, right? So you can see that our iris radiates around here. So I can use this circular ramp to kind of get this fall off that bleeds and transitions along this iris shell. So I'm going to go ahead and go back here. Let's close the iris. So I could do things, you can hopefully see pretty quickly how you could do something like, let's just drop some colors in here. I'm going to go ahead and drop another white right there. So here I'm making the boundary of the sclera to the iris. Here I'm going to go ahead and set some colors, right? So I'll go ahead and set that one to brown and this one to brown, right? So that's our iris, and then this one's our pupil. And you know, the further away I get from them, the softer that transition, the closer they get to each other, the harder the transition. So you can see how we could use this to kind of isolate and select things. So if I wanted to like add a little bit of a dark ring around the pupil on the iris, you know, I might let that bleed out a little bit. If I wanted a dark ring like you would find on an eyeball, right? So if you look at a lot of people have this darker ring on the outside of their iris, right? Especially younger people. It's more prominent in younger people, is this dark band that goes around the outside. And let's say I didn't get that in my texture map. I could multiply this on top of my texture map, a darker color like that. And then I could just, you know, play around with some fall off to control that. Okay, so hopefully that gives you an idea of how this ramp can be really helpful. Okay, here we are back inside of Maya using RenderMan. So I went ahead and created a material, in this case Pixar Layer Surface, which would let me essentially combine two different materials. Skin for the sclera and then glass for the cornea. So I'm going to make this one more like a skin-like material, and I'm going to make this one more like a glass material. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this mixer layer to transition from one material type to another material type on the same exact object, right? Because these are all the same exact object. I turned on selection highlight. There we go. I'm going to do that with a ramp. That ramp is going to be my mask. So the first thing I'm going to do though is I'm going to go ahead and set up my materials. So let's go ahead and I'm going to start my render going. So I'll do something like this. We'll start IPR. Okay, and one thing I wanted to mention is I went ahead and put my eyeball pieces into a group, and I rotated that 90 degrees facing forward, just so with my environment light that I have in my scene, it's easier to light and look at instead if it was facing straight up. So in this case, I want to hide the iris and the cornea for now, or iris and the sclera, just the iris and the pupil for now. So I'll go and hide the iris, and here we go. Here is our cornea. And so the way I set this up is I went ahead and made my cornea the top material. So in this case, layer 1, and my sclera is going to be my base material. And both of these Pixar layers would come in with that Pixar layer surface if you're using this material. Okay, so for that cornea, what I'm doing is I'm just turning off the diffuse, turning off the default specular settings, not using any of these other settings except for the glass. So I just enabled glass. I brought the reflection and refraction gain up. And then if I wanted to, I can change the refractive index. 1.35, I believe, is the refraction index of water. So I could set it to that. Okay. And then what I'll come in here is I'll go ahead and disable this layer so I can look at the sclera material. So for the sclera material, I'm going to probably just do a diffuse just so the render goes faster. But in this case, I do want a specular. So we're going to go and turn on the specularity. I should do physically based, but let's do physically based. So I'm going to really quickly come over here and go to specular. Let's set it to physically based mode, and I'll come back up to the sclera. And for the primary specular, we're going to go ahead and turn that on, and I'm going to do physical. All right, so the one thing I do have to turn on, bring that edge gain up to 1. Okay, and then I could control that roughness. So maybe I might make it a little rougher. In my case, I like, because I'm doing a stylized kind of render or material, I'm bringing that reflection down on the sclera, so it's a little less noticeable. And so if I was to do subsurface instead of the diffuse, what I would do is I'd come down to subsurface and turn that on instead, which would let me have softer light bleed and color bleed into the material. But that's just going to go a little slower, so we're going to start with that. Okay, so we have our cornea and sclera. So now we need to turn the cornea back on. So I need to define where the sclera starts and the cornea material starts. So I'm going to use a ramp. So you could use the Pixar ramp or the ramp texture. So I'll bring this ramp texture over here, and I'm going to go ahead and plug one of the color channels, because it's a black and white image right here, because I'm using it as a mask, to that layer mask. So we'll plug this one right here to that layer mask. And if I wanted to take a look at this, I can isolate it so we can kind of see it on the model, right? You can see it's using a V ramp and it's the wrong direction. So we're going to go ahead and use that circular ramp. Right, so that's looking pretty good. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get like a harder transition where that iris kind of happens and where that cornea bump starts. So that edge transition right there. And to bring that in, and I got it backwards. So what I might do is I might go ahead and set this one to black and set this color to white. There we go. So now we're actually seeing through here because this is the cornea, but we're seeing the back of the model, so it looks black. All right, so let's go ahead and bring in the iris. So I'm going to go ahead and add this one to a new tab. I'll call this one cornea. And then this one's going to be iris. Okay, and so for this one, I'm going to do a really basic material. Let's go to create. Let's see, Pixar surface. Let's go to Pixar surface. Actually, there we go. RenderMan, and then just do Pixar surface really quickly. I guess I have to do it a different way. So let me go ahead and hide this really quickly. And then I'm just going to assign to this object here, assign a new material, and we're just going to do a Pixar surface. Okay. And then we're going to go ahead and bring back that cornea. Let's just double check that cornea is working. So yeah, we can see through right there. Maybe let's go ahead and dial in that transition there. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this in a little bit more. So it's just barely overlapping the edges of my iris. Okay. And there's a little bit of a shading artifact here, which I'll have to diagnose in a second, but that's looking pretty good. Maybe just a little bit more. Okay. And so we'll do something like that. All right. So let's go ahead and I'm going to hide the cornea for now. And let's go ahead and bring in our material. So let's go back to the, our textures. So I'm going to go into iris. I'm going to do Pixar texture because I'm working with RenderMan. And I'm going to go ahead and load in that texture. Let's go to iris diffuse. Actually, so in this case, I did not export my texture. This is the texture I used for my olds. We're not going to be able to see this whole workflow, but I would load that in and I would plug that into the diffuse color. So you can see that doesn't quite match up because my iris or my pupil on the other character is much larger. But then I would go ahead and add that in, and then we would go ahead and do our specular. So in this case, I'm going to be doing, we're going to have do physical mode. We're going to set that refractive index. We'll just leave it how it is. And I'm going to go ahead and bring that edge color up to white. So we're getting that reflection right there. Let me go ahead and make that diffuse a little bit better. Let me do that really quickly. Here we go. I just made some modifications really quick to match those texture maps to this iris. Apologize for that. So here is my iris color texture. So we'll call this one colored underscore txt. There's my color. It's already mapped from the texturing software to my UVs. We'll show an option of how we can like start blocking and masking some things in a second. So we're going to go ahead and attach that specular map. So Pixar texture again. Let's go ahead and texture. And then I'm going to plug that one in. Let me go ahead and pause this so you guys don't have to watch me do this. Okay, here we are. So this is what the diffuse looks like. And here's that specular on top. And you can see I also plugged in displacement, but I don't really want to go over that right now. So to get that, what we did is I just stuck with artistic mode because I wanted to control the color of that reflection to get that like orangey glow. So I essentially have this blend node that blends from essentially adding in a bright orange to wherever my specular map is lighter. And then wherever it's black, it essentially turns off the specular or drops it darker. You know, maybe I don't want it to fully turn off. So you can see this is what the actual color map looks like. So maybe I don't want it to fully turn off. So if I come in here and I set that black up to something else, like, you know, obviously bringing it up lighter would be a bad idea in here in this case, but I could make it so it just goes to a darker version of that. And then I would just control the roughness to control how sharp that specular is. All right, so that's a little too sharp and probably my displacement's a little too high, to be honest. So we'll bring that down. But yeah, so just combining those together gives us this. Ooh, and that's way too sharp. So we'll just broaden that a little bit. So that's to fake that caustic hit as the light travels against it. And I would dial this in because it's a little too much, but hopefully that gives you guys an idea of what that looks like. And now when we combine it together with the sclera, or cornea and sclera, Shift H, now we have something that looks a bit like this. And so what would be left here is to get, you know, a material on the sclera. So essentially getting a color going on there, getting some refinement on this iris. We can go ahead and do that right now because I promised I would show you guys how to do it or something like that. So I'm going to come in here and I'm actually going to use a blend node. So we'll do blend node just to blend two colors together. I'm going to attach the result of this one to the actual color. And then for this one, what we're going to do is we're going to combine one of those ramps. So we're going to use the ramp like we had seen before. So we're doing a circular ramp. And that's going to be on the top. This one's going to be on the bottom. So our original texture map. And then I'm just going to multiply them together. So which will take the darker values of this ramp and add them to, or essentially subtract, that just darkens my, my texture map wherever it's black. So if I go in here, set that to multiply. Now it should look like, let's go ahead and see, maybe I needed, oh, I didn't change it. Multiply, there we go. So now we should be looking, let's go ahead and hide this cornea for a second. If I bring this in, let's go to my ramp, and I'm going to go ahead and set this one to black. There we go. And so now I just want this to kind of be along the outer edge. So I might bring this in a bit more. There we go. And get a soft transition. That chemical color's fine. So now when I bring that cornea back, hopefully we can get that darker band coming forward on the edges. And a lot of that is going to be dialing back and forth to get it just perfect. And so I've used things like adding on or multiplying together a gradient that goes from the top, so a V-ramp, so I can darken or mask out either the displacement or the specular mask up here. But this is the general basics of how I approach doing a 3D eyeball. So hope that helps. And hopefully you can get it with a lot of refinement. I mean, not that this is something special or anything like that, but, you know, to get it to this point where it feels really clean, like in the stylized one, you know, it took a lot of dialing in and going back and forth. And there's a lot of notes I still see that I would want to fix on it, but yeah, hope this helps.